Hi everyone, welcome to this week's edition of a Tanzu Community Edition weekly community meeting. Today's date is April 27th, 2022. If you're watching this recording on our YouTube playlist, we encourage you to come join us live. We meet every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. It's a great opportunity for you to come listen in on what the maintainers and folks that are working on the project are doing, provide feedback, maybe bring up any feature requests that you have, or if there's anything you need help with. It's also a good opportunity for you to bring those questions up here. And you're welcome to just sit and listen and get to know folks from the background too. But we would love to meet you. So hopefully you're able to meet us in the weekly ones. But if not, we have a monthly one also that's held every second Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. India Standard Time. And if you can't reach us live, we have other opportunities for you to come connect with us. We are in the Kubernetes Slack workspace and the Tanzu Community Edition channel. You can obviously find us in GitHub and the GitHub discussions. You can add your request, question, or suggestion to our issue list. You can email us, or you can find us on Twitter at VMware TCE. Now, whenever you do attend these meetings, and if you have something you wish to discuss with the team, you just simply add that down at the discussion topic section of the agenda, and we'll get to it towards the end of the meeting. For those that are here today and you're using Tanzu Community Edition, we would love to get more details about your usage of the project. And we've created this pinned issue, in which you would just make a comment here, adding all the details we request of you right here about your organization, any details about how you're using it. Just helps the team understand more about how others are using it. Also, it helps the community understand how others are using it to help us build better products. So please add that comment there. And if you have any questions, let us know. And for those that are here today, please make sure to add your name to attendees list and any organization you are representing here. Welcome to the new faces. I believe I haven't met y'all, Thomas and Russell. Good to have you here. On to announcements. So for content, we've got some things nailed down here for what to expect for our booth presence at KubeCon Europe in Valencia. That's in May. So we're going to have some fun workshop activities at the VMware booth, both physically and virtually. So if you're unable to attend in person, there's still opportunity for you to participate virtually. So we'll continue to provide more details as those comes up as to timing and dates and stuff like that, but keep that on your radar. Anything further in announcements before we move on to updates?
I think there's the mystery meetup that we will want to informally do to just get everyone from the TCE team in some place at the same time. So we can all have a TCE little gathering there. But I think we'll decide on that, on the details a bit closer.
For sure. But some of the things we've been kicking around is maybe meeting up at the lunch space, hanging out there, just sharing a bite to eat and getting to know one another. So super informal, but you can come meet us, all of us that are going to be there in person. But we'll provide details as we get closer. Thanks for the reminder on that, V. Okay, moving on to status updates. Take it away.
Yeah, so I think I'm not sure I put this in the right section because this is not V12 related. It's more general project umbrella. So we've been talking, I guess, a bit informally about a bunch of these things that I'm about to discuss. So I'd like to just provide a more structured way of going about it. So I guess the background is TCE is an open source project. Everything is open source, but right now most contributors are in the VMware, are VMware employees. So there's a lot of internal stuff, internal work that we need to do about how we about how the project goes forward. So I just like to read out a few points here. We've come to a conclusion, which should not be news exactly, but I guess it's clear that TC is meant to be an easily accessible common first step to Tanzu's many possible journeys, projects, offerings, etc. in the open source space. It should provide the pattern language to access all of that good stuff. So this is kind of what our North Star is. And TC is more of a community or a collection of things than a deliverable per se, even though of course, we do ship software. And then the goal really is to get all of these open source things that we have in Tanzu and provide them in a good experience. So I guess the point here is that providing all that stuff as a unified experience is more our North Star than shipping one solution to one thing, to any one thing or another. So talking a bit about focus, we've had, because we are trying to ship open source versions of some things that we have that were not open source or are not open source, we did have some issues decoupling the open source stuff from the non-open source stuff. This has resulted in some blockages or inconveniences at some point or another. Long story short, we want to prioritize for now things that the community has provided feedback on, positive feedback on. So that would be the desktop experience with unmanaged clusters. That's something that it seems it was universally well received. Like I said before, since we are aiming to be the one entry point to all of Tanzu OSS, the user experience and integration of all of those things is also something that we're going to try to focus on a bit more. And we also want to bring TCE to more environments. So, for example, we have a managed cluster running on Kind. We're now going to bring it to Minikube as well. So this focus on providing an experience of all of Tanzu's solutions that can run in many different environments, whatever people are using, is something we want to focus on as well. So what this means in terms of next steps, what I mentioned before about the coupling between the commercial stuff and what we want to offer as open source, that decoupling is so that we can move faster at TC is something we want to work on. We do want to provide, we want to come up with a solution like a minimum runtime to let people run TC on any Kubernetes, and the technical details we're still going over. So if you have technical questions about this, the answer to whatever your question is we don't know. We're working on it. We're going to announce things soon. And we did receive a lot of feedback about how we communicate with the community in terms of decision-making and community weighing in on it. Big thanks to Stephen, again, who provided a lot of great feedback a few days ago. So me and Nancy, who's the community manager, we're going to be working together on doing a better job on that continuously as we go forward. And for specifics of V13, and we didn't even release V12 yet, but we do want to make the roadmap for V13 very transparent. So people are going to know what we're working on, how we're working on it, what we're thinking. We want that to be as transparent as possible. So we are making some technical decisions this week that we're going to share openly next week, hopefully. And once again, working with Nancy to do as good a job at this transparency as possible. Any comments, feedback, tomatoes you want to throw over IP or however that works?
As a designated talker, of course, I'll come up with a question. The question, so there was something you said about the North Star that really struck with me, and now I can't remember it. So I'd like to, it was something you said right before that, like something like our North Star is the integrate. Was it like our North Star is the integration of all the open source components? Is that what you said again? Because
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the goal is, so we have this upstream model, and now I'm speaking about VMware. We have this upstream model where most of our products, they start with an open source foundation. And we think all of these foundations should be openly available. So whatever X product it is, it's built on open source. So yeah, there's stuff we sell, etc. But here in TC, we want to take all of the open source foundations that we have and all the open source products that the open source projects that we work on. And we want to offer that in a cohesive, good to use experience that people can use openly and of course for free because it's open source, etc. But then the goal of TC is we bring all of that together and we provide that in a way that is good to use. And I think two words that are key that I mentioned there are pattern language. We want everything to make sense together. We don't want there to be like, oh, here's 10 different things that work in 10 different ways, etc. So we want to bring an experience that becomes a language that makes sense.
So it's to use an analogy, it sounds like we're kind of going to be the Fedora project in a certain sense, like the upstream to in terms not. Oh, everybody calm down. I saw Josh like what the. No, what I meant was like we're upstream and Fedora takes a whole bunch of the upstream stuff and gives you an upstream Linux distribution that works well together and teaches you the pattern language. It's the free entryway into the RHEL ecosystem is what I would say, right? And so TCE, are we saying like TCE is the entryway into the Tanzu way of doing things? Like that's the open source. Sorry if I'm going too deep or offended people by mentioning Red Hat.
I hesitate a bit on that because I don't want things to be like, oh, TCE is where you start before you start paying for some product, because that's not the goal. Like,
right,
we are providing solutions that are real and valuable, and it's a productive thing to use, regardless of whether you are going to move on to paid projects or not. So I don't want to get that idea across because that's not the point.
Yep.
But I guess in a sense, you are right that we have a bunch of products that we build, and the open source stuff is we're making it available.
Okay, and just to be clear, Fedora is my preferred desktop Linux environment, and I know plenty of people who run business on it. So that wasn't a business versus not business. It was more of like the upstream, bringing stuff cohesively together like a distribution. But that gets my next question. So then what is that thing that I install when I say Tanzu unmanaged cluster create, or Tanzu create unmanaged cluster, or whatever the command is? What have I actually put? Because everything else has a project name. Like we have Harbor, we have Pinniped, we have Carvel, we have all these things. Is there a name for that core thing that I'm laying down? What's our Linux kernel name? Because that's what I kind of see here.
John, do you want to take that? I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, unmanaged cluster sits at a kind of an interesting intersection of like what we've been doing experimentally, quickly iterating in the open source, but also like what it means to have something Tanzuified, I guess. And I think there's a lot to come with that as well. But right now, the way I see unmanaged cluster today is at the end, I get a cluster that has Kpac controller, that has our package repository, and I can then go and install those packages onto that cluster, which gives us a pretty good way for people on a local workstation with a single node cluster to quickly spin up and iterate fast.
Jace?
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I think we started with sort of the shortcut to try and get the projects out in the open space, by trying to sort of take what we'd done internally and share it externally. And I think that what we saw was we got really good feedback, which is exactly what we wanted. I mean, I think we've been wildly successful by any measure so far. And I think that one of the maybe unfortunate aspects of that was that people sort of tied together or conflated like the piece of software that you install as TCE. And I think that the TCE as a value prop is actually much bigger than that in the sense that the View was explaining. So it's like, it's more about curation and having this sort of opinionated but composable way to start to play with all the Tanzu portfolio products. Like as an app developer, you may be interested in playing with TAP, in the application lifecycle management. And in that world, you don't necessarily care about multi-cluster, right? You just want a cluster to try and run your applications on. But as a DevSecOps or some other platform operator type persona, you may be much more focused on how do I spin up multiple clusters. And so I think the decoupling of experiences and to really start playing with that composable, curated journey as Tanzu is really the key thing here. Because I think, to me, the exciting thing about Tanzu is like VMware, and we have these amazing world-class experts on the cloud native ecosystem and how to navigate it and how to get the value out of that. And essentially what we're doing is we're giving that portfolio of folk, that portfolio of things to folks to start to explore and use and learn and help us, or we can be your guideposts on that. So I think that the runtime becomes less important, right? It's more of an any Kubernetes type space. And so the kernel is Kubernetes. And what we're doing is simply giving you access to all the great things that you can do given that runtime. So if you need a multi-cluster runtime, then you look at the multi-cluster aspects of the software we provide, or a single cluster, then you have unmanaged clusters, so forth. So I think that the fixation is less on the runtime and more on the value that we add on top of it and the curation of that journey to get there.
I know, but I'm gonna have to. So there's this and a follow-up question. I'm gonna have to get up on a stage, and I'm gonna have to go into a workshop. So I get what the whole idea is, and I'm not. Tanzu V did a great job explaining what Tanzu Community Edition is. I'm just trying to get, when I get up on the stage and I say Tanzu cluster create, what have I just done? What have I installed? Like if I was installing Fedora, just to keep using an example, and I say install, I can say, oh, I've just put the Linux kernel down and I've done this thing. Like I've done we could say it's an opinionated version of Kubernetes, if that's what you want to say. Like, but I want some clarification on what happens, what I've just done to the user when I say Tanzu cluster create. The second question is, are we still going to always have managed clusters as well in TCE?
So part of the exercise of getting the details together, which we're sorry that they are not there yet, is going to be defining what the base Tanzu system means. So we'll have an answer to that when we scope out V013. Regarding managed clusters, we have every intent in the near term to continue repackaging the managed cluster functionality. But again, as Jace put it, we're not going to bind ourselves so closely to that being the only model where we can show the value of Tanzu on top of.
Yeah, so just a clarification, what all of this discussion means is not that we are removing something. We are not saying, oh, we're not going to do this or that anymore. It's more of doing well, speaking specifically of the management clusters functionality. We're not saying we're removing management clusters. What we're saying is there's a lot more to TCE than management clusters, and we are going to try and not be stuck on anything.
Right. You may be starting on top of an existing cluster, right? I mean,
yeah.
At the end game might be, you might be installing an unmanaged cluster, you might be installing a managed cluster environment, or you might be enhancing or Tanzuizing an existing other Kubernetes. And all of those will be possible as the end game, instead of just the first two, which are now.
Yeah, so as long as we, I don't want to sound controversial, but just hypothetically, if one day VMware decides, oh, we don't want to provide management cluster, we don't want to build this stuff anymore, we want to focus on whatever the, I don't know, CryptoCoin is, I don't know the future, but, and then we are not offering a VM coin. Oh my God,
Yeah.
okay. I'll propose that to the VPs. Anyway, if basically we want to offer the open source counterpart of everything that we have. So if one day the wider company changes priorities in that term, then that changes what we can offer. But that's beyond all of our pay grades, I suppose. As long as we are offering it, then that's something that we want TC to bring it as well, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I also do have one other question, which is something that had come up initially in TC, which was there was the idea of how do we upgrade? If this is the entry point to Tanzu, how does someone move from this to a commercial? And by decoupling from that, that obviously becomes more difficult. The question is, has that idea kind of been left as not going to be done or not being done for now? Is that still something that's being thought about, how someone could move from community edition to a commercial offering, or is that kind of on pause for now or canceled?
The way I'm thinking about it is not so much that it's not that we, gosh, how do I phrase this? Basically, what I mean is that the core competency of the TC core team is to offer this collection of solutions. The individual things that we offer, they are responsibility of those individual teams. So for example, if we take TAP, TC is not going to be the arbiter of, do we want to offer a paid upgrade for paid TAP offerings if you start from TC? That's not our call to make. So basically the goal of TC is we're making room and we're making everything integrated nicely. And it's up to the TAP team in this example to provide that upgrade path. So basically we're saying TC is in charge of the whole thing. We are not saying, oh, the individual solutions needs to work this way or that way. Does that make sense?
Well,
Okay.
Can I ask who asked the question? I didn't.
Scott.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
What would you estimate is the percentage of users in a freemium model who actually do that upgrade?
So I can say from the 10 places that I've installed by different customers of mine TCE,
Yeah,
8 of them are now using commercial.
okay.
Now, none of them did an upgrade, obviously, because but I would say TC is a very easy way to get someone started on Tanzu. I hope to see TCE being used not only for that and being used like any other open source distribution.
I did this with Zen Server. I did this at Veritas. Rancher, of course, does it. And globally, across like all freemium programs, the number tends to run around 3 or 4%.
Wow. Okay.
So there's a lot of redeployment in general. We could be wrong. We could be much higher here. It could end up being that, you know, at some point we really want to come up with a more in-place strategy. You know, and Rancher's program, for example, is just turn on support. It may be that, you know, at some point company needs to revisit it because there's a lot of direct demand for dealing with it that way. And, you know, we probably need to find a way to support same bits and attach SaaS services and do some stuff like that. But it tends to be across the industry so low that you know, I have to admit, you're doing a great job, that it tends to be a migration strategy more than an in-place upgrade strategy.
That makes sense.
Yeah, from my point of view, I only got positive feedback to that concept. I think everyone that I talk to wants this continuity thing to be a thing. How it's executed, that's going to be outside the scope of TC and within the responsibility of the individual offerings. So I guess that's my way of not giving a straight answer, I suppose.
Okay, before we move on to engineering updates, any further questions or comments regarding this?
Actually, I have a question for Scott, I guess. Are those workloads that folks are using on TCE, are they primarily sandboxes that people are messing around with, or are they, staging or development environments of production workloads, or are people actually using this in a production-like environment and then looking to upgrade their production type environment?
Like dev staging. Usually it starts in, quick iterative development, testing things out, moves to dev and staging. A lot of times organizations, that what we're seeing is that they're starting with, let's say, a commercial offering in production, but don't plan on paying for anything in dev and staging at the beginning. And then down the road, they come and say, hey, we want to pay for that too. And you want to give the same experience in the dev environment. So they start with something like a TCE, and then, want to all of a sudden start paying for support because something breaks and they have a really fun time in dev. So then they're willing to put out money, but it changes amongst customers, I would say.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So they kind of have played around with it where it doesn't matter. Now they're like, okay, this is nice. Let's try and get it into something where we can actually support it and pay for better support on it. Okay.
Exactly.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Anything further on this topic? Moving on to engineering updates.
Yeah, I can field those unless Josh wanted to. Not much from us, just in our testing cycle for RC2 of the 0.12 release. The target remains May 10th for when that will be GA. Yeah, that is it.
Oh, cool. And any questions for the engineering team? Ryan, your update on App Toolkit?
Yeah. So App Toolkit version 0.2.0 came out. Primary changes from, so I'll give a brief thing of App Toolkit. Essentially, the idea behind it is it throws together all of the tab components that are open source and lets you install them with one package that kind of manages them all rather than going and configuring everything individually. So what's new is we've introduced the Cartographer catalog and the Kpac dependencies packages, which were also added in this version of TCE. Those two additions have made it so that if anyone had played around with App Toolkit in 0.1.0, you originally had to kind of do some YTTing, which was a little bit annoying because you would install the App Toolkit and then there was some like additional YAML messing around that you had to do. So that's no longer the case. Now all you have to do is provide one values file and it will pipe everything to the appropriate packages, hopefully, theoretically. And then another feature we added is this idea of a developer namespace. So the idea being, if you'd like to just have a namespace up and ready to go, where you can just start deploying your workloads to it, then you can provide a developer namespace. By default, it is default, but you can now specify a non-default one, and it will go set up the Kpac and supply chain and everything in that namespace so that it's ready to start deploying workloads. The idea behind that is to make it very easy from the get-go to just do a single install command and then just have things start working. But it is still possible to utilize App Toolkit and other namespaces in other ways. It just requires a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more digging around. We kind of wanted to make it easy to have people at least deploy something and see it work. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot.
Has the idea come up to add like a subcommand to the app CLI that, comes along with this to enable a namespace as a developer namespace? meaning instead of doing it in the package, doing it via the CLI, because well, we see that in TAP also, but also with App Toolkit. It is for every namespace, you have to create role bindings, the roles, the service account, in TAP there's even more, but you have to create a lot of resources just to make the basic supply chain, let alone anything that you add Tecton or any testing into to work. Having that as just like a CLI command would make it really easy to maybe get started with that and use it more efficiently than just a single namespace. Although it is great already to have that for the single namespace getting started.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I can't recall it coming up, so I'll definitely bring that back to the rest of the App Toolkit team and see what they think of it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm doing it today with just a Kyverno policy that just generates all those resources for me
Oh, cool.
in every namespace.
Okay.
Because they generate policies.
We'll probably reach out to you and ask if you can take a look at that. That'd be great.
Definitely.
I have a quick question related to that, and I don't know if I just didn't see it in the doc, but so I think what Scott just talked about is I've already got a pre-existing namespace. Is it possible, is App Toolkit installed cluster-wide, or is it just installed in that namespace? Like, can I then use App Toolkit to say, hey, make a new namespace for me and make it ready? Can I do that after once I've installed it?
So you can't tell App Toolkit to go make another namespace, but you can enable another namespace that App Toolkit that can then operate in. As Scott was saying, you kind of have to do the role bindings, you have to do all that kind of stuff, which is nasty right now. And we do all of that for the developer namespace from the get-go. How you enable the next namespace is a slog right now. And so we need to figure out how we're going to resolve that in the future going forward. Another problem that we are kind of starting to broach around other namespaces is if you try and give App Toolkit the ability to create these namespaces, then it can theoretically, it will own them and try and reconcile them to that state. And so if you have any other tools that are trying to, add labels to these namespaces or do anything like that, then it can get a bit hairy. So we do have to be a bit careful of that. But yeah, theoretically, so to answer your first question, App Toolkit's installed cluster-wide, you can use it on other things as well. You just have to create the resources and the role bindings and stuff like that in order to utilize them.
Okay, because usually I use a namespace per project, right, on the same cluster. And so okay. That's the very typical pattern for me when I'm developing apps.
Yeah, this was a debate we had internally of like, do we even bother enabling a single namespace with the intent of it's easy to use and get started, but then people think like, oh, it should be this easy to start using on a different namespace as well. And that's when you kind of end up with an incongruous workflow.
For the namespace, by the way, creation, but in packages that I've done that have done the same thing, one of the things that I've done is you can add a cap annotation to the namespace telling it to basically not deal with updates, just to forget any update and just create it. And you can even tell it not to delete it, just have it do an orphan when it deletes. So that's an easy way, at least in Cap controller, to be able to do that within the package. So you could use it as a bootstrapping mechanism, but not as a reconciliation mechanism for those specific resources that you don't want it to necessarily manage their life cycle beyond creation.
Yeah, okay, awesome, thank you.
Thank you for that, Ryan, and thanks, Scott and Stephen, for your input on that. Do we have any other questions regarding App Toolkit? Okay, moving on to discussion topics. We have about 6 minutes left. John, do you think that's enough time for you to go through this?
Yeah, it's pretty short and sweet. I'll just share my screen quick. Whoops, how do I get out of this? Share screen. Okay, so this was a proof of concept that I've thrown up for a wizard in Tanzu Community Edition. In this specifically plugging into unmanaged cluster. There's a demo video here if you want a little deeper dive as well, but I would just love feedback on this. It's related to this, I guess, proposal. And kind of what it's trying to solve for is a gap between maybe what users are doing to install and bootstrap clusters via like flags and config files. And then there's like this really nice smooth UX with the guided UI in a browser. But there's kind of this in between that, leaves a little something to be desired maybe for people on headless environments or in a non-browser environment, or like you're doing some crazy SSH tunneling stuff or something. So to show what that's like real quick, we can just call unmanaged clustered wizard. Josh had given some great feedback about this not being its own separate command. I think that's really, really good. But this definitely shows at least like what this would feel like, what this would look like. So right here, it kind of boots you into this where, you can tab between all the options. I can write, okay, cool, John's cool cluster. I can go up to worker node count or something. And, you just start doing all this stuff. This brought in a library. That's, I think, part of what, I want feedback on is how much we want to bring in and stuff. So if I do this, we can just go to submit and it starts off right away. I think also plugging this into the config option would be really, really cool, which Josh had given that feedback as well. So all that to say, that is a super, super rough proof of concept. Please give me feedback in this PR here.
Great, thank you. Scott says, I love UI, this is awesome. Any other questions or comments on? Cool. For those watching from home, if you have any feedback regarding anything that like John just showed, or stuff about the roadmap or App Toolkit, please reach out to us and any of the channels that we have available to reach out. So we have email, we have Twitter, we have Slack, and we have GitHub discussions, all sorts of ways for you to connect with us. We would love to hear your thoughts on any of the stuff that's provided here. And if you have any feedback on items you wish to see added to the community meeting or things that we should be doing better, please feel free to reach out to us about that as well. And with that, thanks everyone for joining today and enjoy the rest of your day.